What's going on, Samson Strength Coach Collective listeners? On today's episode, we have a very, very good friend of mine, Greg Masturzo. He and I met at Campus Rec, my first job within the physical field, campus recreation at Temple University. And Greg, we always used to joke, was like an 80-year-old man. And I know he'll appreciate me telling this because we'd always joke that he has butterscotch candies in his pocket and everything because he was just the most mature and disciplined person I ever met. One of the hardest workers I've ever met as well, too. And it was just fantastic for me, one, to catch up with him, but then two, to be able to expose the world to Greg Masturzo because he's somebody who cares. He's somebody who does a fantastic job when I worked with him, and I know he does an amazing job as a physical therapist. And we talk about what he does. We talk about what happened with his soft skills and how they were able to be grown because he worked as a bartender. He's worked as a bar back. He's worked in campus rec. He seriously worked his tail off the entire time we were in school. And so it's amazing for me to see him translate that into his field. So we talk about the soft skills within physical therapy, what it was like for him to actually become a DPT, and all that other fun stuff that comes with it. So I greatly appreciate Greg giving me his time. And as always, to you, the listener, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. What's going on, Samson Strength Coach Collective listeners? On today's episode, we have a very good friend of mine. I'm very excited to speak with him, Greg Masturzo, coming all the way to us from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. How are you, Greg?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm good. Now, this is a quick anecdote, and I have to mention this because it just shows what the type of person Greg is, right? Greg gets an appendectomy 2 weeks ago, a little less than 2 weeks ago at this point, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I, as a selfish friend, was like, "Hey, do you want to come on the podcast?" Like last week, and Greg, without saying a word, goes, "Yeah, absolutely, I'd love to." And he's like, "I just need to see if I can return to work or not yet, and that'll determine my schedule." And I completely remembered that he had a full appendectomy. But as I said, an amazing friend because he had zero issue whatsoever with coming on the podcast, even though he was still recovering from a major surgery. So thank you, Greg. I appreciate you.
You know anything for you, Connor. Anything for
and
you.
we certainly will get into what Greg has done for me as well too, because he's done a lot. But I'm excited to bring that up in a little bit. But to start off, can you just give us a background of your career and then what's brought you to your career as a DPT?
Yeah, so I have been working as a PT for what'll be a year and about a month or so. Um, Started school back in undergrad at Temple, 2013. That's where Connor and I met a few years after that. And then from there, kind of just took that nice 10-year process of undergrad, several gap years, and then finally PT school starts, COVID starts, and then all that fun stuff. Um, but yeah, that was pretty much it. I mean, I got in PT just because of, again, former athlete, um, and then got injured a lot. And I was like, oh, this seems fun. And then here we are. It's not a very exciting story, unfortunately, but
No, but there's a lot within there that we can certainly dive into. My big question for you is, like you said, it seems like PT would be fun. I know you as a person, but the listeners are trying to get to know you a little bit too. What drew you to physical therapy? What made it appealing for you as a career to seek?
so I'd say probably just the ability to help improve someone's quality of life in
Mm.
general. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I'm in right now where I work is very sport related. Um, but I've grown to appreciate all facets of different areas of PT in terms of like just excuse me, general outpatient ortho. If you're working with geriatrics, neuro, or even like pediatrics, I found a real enjoyment in working in pediatrics that I never would have thought, just given I didn't think kids and I would get along too well. Um, but it really opened my eyes to like how appreciative it makes you of how well off like we are as healthy individuals who are pretty fortunate to not have, knock on wood, many injuries, but also just like our own development, how it's been that we can kind of live everyday life like we do, whereas some of people need a little more help. And that's what I really like, knowing that I can kind of help get to that next point.
Well, I mean, that's just such I don't know. It's such an awesome way to look at things, but then also such an awesome driver for your motivation for your career, right? Like I think at the end of the day, within the strength and conditioning realm, it's like, yes, I want to prevent injuries. I want to help these people reach their peak performance, and winning is awesome. But at the end of the day, like it's winning or losing. It's not life or death. It's not something where these people are living a terrible quality of life. I mean, obviously, if we're losing, I'm not going to be super happy, right? My quality of life isn't going to be incredibly high. But at the end of the day, it's not like you directly affect just their ability to even do simple things like stand up from a couch, right? Or be
Yeah.
able to move without pain. It's funny that we actually have this episode now. I just remember my sister, she's almost exactly like you, Greg. She will never ever complain about anything. And then when she asked me for my help, I was like, oh my God, she might be dying. She said, or she had tennis elbow, right? And she said she would have pain consistently throughout the day, wouldn't be able to pick up a water bottle. And she texted me after I gave her a couple exercises, and she just mentioned immediately how it just completely changed the quality of her life. And it's so interesting that you can see that people are just immediately happier when they're able to live without pain. Have you seen that within your career too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's one of those ones. Sorry, it's hard because of how subjective something like pain can be.
Mm,
But like just trying to like put yourself in their shoes and then trying to be like, okay, how do I get them to do X, Y, and Z, and kind of like build that trust factor with them to get them to do it, and
yeah.
like have the overall buy-in. Just because, especially something like pain is like something that's really hard for some people to push through, especially if they're not used to pain. Um, just because of how we perceive pain as like a bad thing, where it's not always the case. Where it's like could be like an indicator to them of like, hey, we're doing too much, or hey, we're not ready for that. And it's just trying to get people to kind of understand how that works is a challenge. But when it does sink in and kind of get them there, it's very rewarding because they're very appreciative of maybe the few exercises you gave them. Like the example you just gave, like it wasn't much, but it was something that changed their outlook drastically. And that's a
Mm.
very rewarding feeling.
And so, how do you get people to recognize the pain aspect and how to understand that it's not always necessarily a bad thing? It's more of an indicator of other parts of the process.
I think it's trying to get them to understand the difference, and this is a hard one for a lot of people, of like, what is pain? What is muscle working, muscle, quote unquote, pain? Where it's like, okay, they're doing bridges, let's say. Like, oh, it's like, it hurts my butt. Okay, what does that feel like? That's painful. Okay, but how would you describe it? Is it sharpshooting? Does it feel like it's more muscle burning sensation? Is it more, oh, okay, I feel it doing something? Cool, it's that one. Let's keep going. It's sharpshooting. Is it jumping up past, like, we'll use like a 5 out of 10, let's say? Great, that's some pain we'll want to back off on. Let's modify it. And just trying to teach them, like, in a very, like, exercise sense, that's one way. Um, but if not, even, like, if it's, like, day-to-day pain in terms of, is it you're doing something and it's super debilitating? Or is it going to be, okay, I'm doing it, I can kind of push through, it gets achy, and then it kind of goes away, or it like settles there and then goes away. And like trying to teach them like, okay, what's okay to push through, and what is like that pain, what we're trying to avoid right now, especially if they're like more acutely staged compared to like chronic.
Mm. And I mean, I'm sure that concept for athletes might be a little bit easier to understand, but then for Gen Pop, I mean, that maybe that sounds a little elitist, right? As a strength coach and a PT talking about general population saying they don't understand pain. But like you said, some people have never experienced these sensations before. I'm sure it can be very challenging for them to understand it, and then also understand that sometimes pain is a part of the process of getting better. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I was just reading an interesting book about like the whole pain process and how it's perceived. Um, and it's basically the expression they use is that it's all in your head, but not in the sense that, you say that and it's insulting to someone, but it's like it's driven by the brain and how the brain perceives things. And essentially, like your brain acts as like the main control center. And when it notices something's wrong in like a certain part of the body lower, other areas will start to have to work harder. And that leads to them overworking and then leading to an increased general pain response. And that's kind of the analogy I've been trying to use with people in terms of, okay, we're perceiving it as one thing. because your body is acutely inflamed or angry with you. And then because it's doing so much more, it's leading to lower down the chain or down the line other issues, and it's kind of backing everything up.
Mm.
And using that analogy has been something I've found some success with. It's just making sure the phrasing is key, because you never want to take it to a point where it's insulting someone.
Yep.
And I experienced that firsthand, not through myself, but when I was a student. One of my clinical instructors was like, "You see, the pain is all in your head," and this person immediately was combative about it.
Mm.
And he had to be like, "No, I don't mean like you're imagining the pain. It's like this is where it's starting. Like it starts in the brain and works its way down." Didn't really smooth things over that well, but it's a great learning experience. I was like, okay, how do I phrase things? And now it's like it's been a nice carrot for me, because it's just trying to reinforce the fact that there is pain in that area, but it's not necessarily that area being painful. It's how it's perceiving pain. And some people perceive pain as, the worst 10 out of 10, get me to the hospital ever pain. And some are, it's like an 8 out of 10, and there's no change in their demeanor. There's nothing that is showing they're in distress. And that's a person that probably deals with pain pretty well, but doesn't have a great understanding. So it's very interesting.
My favorite is the players who will come in, and I'll ask them on the pain scale, like, okay, 1 being you can barely feel it, may not even feel it at all, and 10 being the absolute worst pain you've ever felt in your life. Where are you at? And they're like, probably a 7 or 8. And I'm like, okay, you're standing here completely fine. You're saying your ankle's at an 8 out of 10. I was like, okay, so again, just to reiterate, how it's 10 is the worst pain you've ever felt in your life. Where are you at? And he's like, probably 6 or 7, if I'm really thinking about it. I'm like, all right, dude. I don't think that's necessarily accurate.
My favorite phrase is, "I have a high pain tolerance," and that person usually never has a high pain tolerance.
It's 100% correct. And I'll say this: the one thing I've noticed with the pain tolerance, if we have talked about pain, is the people who will stretch pregame warmups. Right, like when you see their face, if we're doing just a passive hamstring stretch for them, I'll notice if how their face looks when I'm stretching them. It's like, either if they're like completely calm and I know I'm cranking on it, right, and then the ones who I won't even get to 90 degrees and they're already like and those are always the ones who say they have a high pain tolerance too, and I'm like, no, you don't.
No, no, we
Well, go ahead.
I would say no. We do a lot of hands-on manual therapy with our patients, just
Yep.
because we get a decent amount of post-ops, and it's like a lot of soft tissue release, stuff like that. And I mean, I have messed up hips. Don't get me wrong, but if someone goes digging into my psoas, I'm shooting up the table. I'm trying to crawl up the wall. It's a horrible experience. I do not tolerate those things well. I feel great after, but there are people that I'll do it to, and it's just expressionless. I'm like, that's insane. I'd be
It's
crying right now.
Yeah, I remember the first time I ever got introduced to the what is it, like the double peak, like the psoas releaser,
Oh,
right, or
that's
whatever.
so right. I hate that
Oh
thing.
yeah, I hate that thing. And I was an intern, so our head strength coach at the time was like, "You have to do it," and I was like, "Okay." And then I was on it. And he's like, "No, don't be soft." I was like, "No, please, for the love of God, get me off this thing."
It's like I hate this. I hate that's yeah. That's not a fun feeling.
No, absolutely not. And so, okay, so you mentioned the school aspect too, and I think it's important. And for context for you, our listeners are mostly strength and conditioning coaches,
Mhm.
whether it's at the high school, professional, collegiate level. What is the actual process of becoming a doctor of physical therapy? What's the schooling behind it, and then what are the shadow hours, and what goes all into it?
So I am a great example of the long the long run to get there. I had, like I talked about earlier, like very briefly mentioned, 4 years undergrad at Temple University. I was a kinesiology major with a pre-health concentration, which I don't even think exists anymore with the
No.
way they restructured the program there. I did basically a 5th year to catch up on sciences, because I had a not great advisor. So it took me about, let's say, 4.5, 5 years to get the undergrad finished. And then I took 2.5 years off in between to try to get into school. And then uh, my resume wasn't exactly the best. in terms of PT related stuff. I did a whole lot of working that wasn't related to that field, which has carryover, and I'll touch on that in a second. But in the PT like medical aspect, I only had about 50 shadow hours, so I limited myself into where I could apply just based on that alone. And I don't do well with standardized testing, so that also knocked my schools down like applied to by about three, which ended up being Jeff, Temple, and Drexel. Jeff, a week after I sent my resume in, flat out rejected me. Temple waitlisted me, and then Drexel offered me an interview the same day as my Temple one that I already confirmed. So I was like, okay, well, that's not going to happen. Got an interview from Drexel, and then they were like, hey, you can either defer till next year or we can put on the wait list and have to reapply if you don't get in. And I was like, well, no, we're not doing that. So I immediately deferred, and then I started September 2020, which is right in the thick of COVID. So that was like kind of like that process of like the actual school aspect. The big things I would say is if you are looking to ever apply or PT is something in your sights, get a lot of experience, like shadowing. It just looks better. Ask a lot of questions. I didn't do that. I felt like I was behind in school when I started. So I felt like I had to ask more questions throughout the schooling process when I was in the program. And the other is no experience is bad experience. Connor will tell you I've spent the last 10 years working in just about every bar in the city. And what I learned was that's also not bad experience because you learn how to talk to people, you learn how to have a conversation. I mean, what we do on a day-to-day basis is constant human interaction. We're building relationships, building rapport. You as a strength coach, me as a PT, we're trying to build trust in our athletes or in our patients. And the ability to knowing how to talk to someone or having the ability to talk to someone is huge because when I started PT school, I realized that was lacking in some of my cohort. And part of it's just the comfortability aspect. I may not know what's going on at all times, or I may be like, okay, I don't know what is happening here, but I know I can at least talk to someone, try to ease their concerns, and at least meet them on like just a person-to-person basis, and at least start there to build some of that trust, and then take what I know and use that in terms of like treating.
Hey, I'm so glad you mentioned that, and I was certainly going to mention that within the show because I think it is really, really valuable experience. And so you have been bartending for 10 years, correct?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
don't you still bartend?
yeah, part time, just
Part
one
time
one day a week now
at the Palladium?
at the Palladium.
Hell yeah!
Um, I've gotten rid of all my college bars, so that's all my past now. Not doing those anymore.
No,
I
okay.
value my sanity.
That's good. And I have to bring this up. So Greg got me a job as a bouncer at Tavern on Broad, which was it's now closed, which is very sad.
R.I.P. Tavern on Broad.
R.I.P. Tav, or TOB, right? But we ended up. I went there as a bouncer. I remember I went in. I was like 20, and they were like, "Are you 21?" And I was like, "No." And they're like, "All right, whatever." And so they hired me. And so Greg and we ended up working together only like what 2 shifts total the whole time.
2 shifts total. One of them was the Super Bowl, wasn't it?
One was the Super Bowl, yep, and then one was I think maybe it wasn't New Year's Eve. It was they needed you for something though.
Oh, it was probably the parade day.
Yes, Mummers, yep, and so it was amazing because that job has given me some amazing stories. What's funny is I don't know if listeners know I'm 6 feet tall, like 255, and I was the smallest bouncer there by far. So my job was literally to be the one to help guide people out. Actually, no, sorry, Kevin was the smallest bouncer, but
Yeah.
but he had the personality to make up for it, and so my job was just to guide people out. And basically be like, you can either go with me or you can go with him. And it'd be like Ty, who's like 6'7" and 300 pounds. And so that has given me some fantastic stories, which I appreciate greatly. But I bring that up, and I think the bartending aspect is really important because exactly like you mentioned, like all you're trying to do is build a relationship with these patients, and all you're trying to do is convince them that you have their best interest at heart, right? And it's interesting how the things that you say can directly affect your program, almost exactly like you mentioned with the example from earlier about the pain being directly in their head, right? That's something that, especially if it's somebody who may be a little bit hard headed, could completely ruin your relationship, and you get absolutely nothing out of it. So I argue sometimes more, and that's why we like doing this podcast the most, is that the art side is a little bit more important of strength and conditioning or physical therapy, the soft skills, the ability to actually speak to people, because a lot of programs work and a lot of different modalities, I'm sure, work within physical therapy. But at the end of the day, if the patients aren't adhering to what you're asking them to do, they're not going to be able to see that success. So I agree 1,000%. Have you just noticed even just your ability to carry conversation because of your years and experience of bartending has allowed you to be more successful as the PT?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
so. Because I'm not gonna lie, there are definitely days that I'll look at someone and be like, I'm not even sure. Like at this point, like what's next? Just because I may have exacerbated all options, or I'm like, this is just new to me. But it's like, all right, let me at least keep building that trust aspect, and then that way they at least know, like, okay, I'm gonna try to do this. I'm gonna work on this, and then when they leave, I'm like, all right, cool. Let me dig into a whole bunch of research on that
Mm.
to get them better. I don't want them leaving here being like, all right, well, he doesn't care, like about me in terms of my health or as a person. I don't really feel comfortable in this setting. Why am I going to go back? At least if I can get that trust aspect there, build up time, like, all right, cool, we'll see you in a week. Let me figure out what I can try next. And even though I'm like, I'll flat out tell both to him, like, look, I'm going to be honest. We're at the point now where I'm not sure. Let's try these things. If it doesn't work, I'm going to reach out to X, Y, and Z or talk to colleagues or like at least let them know, hey, this is what we're going to do and come back. And try something new. At the very least, they're appreciating the effort that's there, but still knowing that like at the end of the day, okay, he has my interest at heart, and like that's been a big driver for me to make sure, or to hold on, I lost my words. That's been a big proponent of like the bar industry. That's been able to help me like carry over,
Mm.
just that ability to speak to people and like at least build that relationship. Because if
Well,
not, oh sorry,
no, you go ahead.
no, because I've definitely had a few that just like do not really care about anything but the PT aspect. Don't try to like come down to a personal level, and those sessions just go poorly. And I've had a few that
Mm.
just didn't either want to work with me or come back, and it's because they were focused on like the hard numbers, and that was it. Which again, I don't fault them for that, but it's like PT is so much more than just like, okay, you have to hit X, Y, and Z, because it's never going to be a linear process.
Mm. Well, I love you just being open and honest with your patients as well, too, right? Like I think at the end of the day, especially in Philly, it's hard to explain to people in the South how high the BS meter is for people in the northeastern area, right?
Yes.
But if you are going to sit there and pretend like you know everything, people can read you immediately,
Yeah.
and they can see that you really are just trying to seem smarter. You're trying to seem like you have a better grasp on things than you do. When at the end of the day, it's you have the basic knowledge. It's just I need to know a little bit more specifically about your case, and I can reach out and understand these resources. But even that, just that being open and honest with them and communicating with them is going to go leaps and bounds and truly improve their rehab process. I'm sure. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And that's like, I don't want to jump the gun here, but like for anyone that's going into starting their first year as a as a PT or a strength coach, first thing I would say is don't be afraid to say you don't know,
Mm.
and don't be afraid to ask for help. I do it on a daily basis. My two colleagues that are like years of experience above me, I bug them all the time. Um, and it's always a great learning moment, and they're always happy to help because they know it's going to make everyone else better around them. And I think that's hard for someone that's new to a field to be like, I don't know what I'm doing. What should I do? I don't want to ask for help because they feel like it's inferior to them, or they just don't feel like, I don't know, they need it. And that's a big one too.
Yeah, it was so funny you bring that up. I was a guest on a podcast the other week, and they asked me about a failure I've experienced in my career. Right, and the listeners know very well. My first year of running a full conditioning program for a Division I basketball team was god awful. Right, and I had no clue how much conditioning they actually needed and what the demands of the sport were. And they asked me, okay, follow up. What did you do when you experienced that failure? My answer at the time was nothing. It was my first year as a full time strength coach. I felt like I should have known this. And so instead of reaching out at the time, obviously I took that process under the summer, right? But instead of reaching out and asking people, I just got upset with myself. I would get upset with the team if they weren't able to do the things that I thought they would be able to do. And it just became a very negative situation as a whole because, like you said, it made me feel like I was inferior or I didn't know what I should know at that point. But I think, especially for people like us, right? Like my background is in sports psych, so I'm better at the soft skills side of things too. And so, for people who maybe don't have necessarily the same science background as others or focus on the science as much, it can feel a little bit challenging sometimes when you see other people who are so good at the science side. But then you got to remember that it's always a blend of skills that help you out. And that's truly what allows you to be the best practitioner possible.
Imposter syndrome is real.
Yeah.
You do feel it for the first 1 to 2 years.
a, a
No,
thousand percent. No, 1,000%. I promise you. Now, okay, so we talked about bartending. So how about campus rec? How has campus rec and your history within campus rec helped you as a practitioner?
wow. Again, the soft skills, communication, especially with people. Um, it's a big one. Every now and then you get the occasional meathead that would be furious about having to put clips on a bar or wear shoes or whatever else.
Or just keep your shirt on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's always my favorite. Where do you go anywhere else? That you're just like, I'm gonna take my shirt off. You can do it in a restaurant? No. Um, at least not where I worked. They throw you out real quick. Um, no, I think same thing though. Soft skills, the communication aspect. There's also, I mean, you and I were both building supervisors. There was a lot. I say a lot of responsibility there, and like when you sit back and think about it, there wasn't. But for 20, 18, 19, 20-year-old us,
Yep.
a little different. Um, but I think that was good because that really helped me understand how to teach people, but also I learned a lot of how to, like, I learned a lot from them in terms of how to teach. And
Mm.
that's been a great carryover too, in terms of like like learning how to make things simple and digestible for everyone to understand. Like when we would do like training or stuff like that, and then that carry over into working with patients. It's like just trying to keep it as simple as straightforward. So I'm not trying to confuse them, and I'm not trying to impress anyone. I don't need to sound smarter than I am. I just want to make it straightforward so that way they understand what they're doing. So when they're working on the floor in first at IBC, or if they're doing their home program at home, everything's pretty straightforward, um, and they're not like left confused. If
Mm.
that makes sense.
Oh, 1,000%. And I'd be remiss if we did not mention our dear friend Anthony Alongi as well, who was our boss at Campus Rec. I know he'll be listening to this podcast, so thank you, Anthony,
He
as
always
always.
does. He always does. He'll shoot a text out later, I'm sure, whenever this goes up.
Oh, 1,000,000%. It's going to be in all caps. Let's go. I promise you that. But the campus rec experience was actually really valuable for me too, because I think back to some of the programs I wrote or some of the things I did as a personal trainer there too,
Yeah.
because you also personal training. It was shocking at, looking back at some of the things that I got away with, right? But the experience and learning how to work with how to work with our clients, right?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget Sandra, who was an older client that I had, who
Oh,
gave me a
yeah.
sweat. Yeah, Sandra was awesome, man, and she gave me a Tennessee sweatshirt when I left for Tennessee, and that was like one of the first times that I really realized the connections that you can make with people too, when you work with them on a daily
Yeah.
basis and see them improve. And her big thing was she just wanted to be able to live a high quality of life. and wanted to be able to continually physically move. And I, of course, gave her like a bodybuilding arm blast, Rich Piana 8 hour like workout, right? But she loved it, and that's what was so cool was I could see these two people who were so quote unquote different, could kind of come together and work together and build a really fun relationship. So those things it was really awesome. And it allowed me to really experience the joy side of strength and conditioning and working in a physical profession too. It was very, very fun.
Yeah, there was. I mean, first off, huge shout out to Anthony.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad you said that because he was and still is my mentor, like to this day.
Yes. Yes.
Every now and then I'll shoot a text, bother him, be like, hey, I have a question about this, or what are your thoughts on this? And then we'll chat. Um, but he was very important in all of our overall development, especially in the facility side of things, as well as the actual personal training aspect.
Absolutely.
In terms of what you talk about with Sandra and like, the Rich Piana workout, I look back at like some of the files I have saved from like those, like whatever, like Excel doc, whatever I did my programming on. And it's like, I didn't know anything back then. I knew what I knew based on whatever book, Starting Strength is what I think you put me on to read.
Yep.
Like when I asked you about books, and then whatever we learned in that course, probably. Because like NSCA meant nothing to me at the time. Like I was like, oh, that's a thing. I'll get to that. And it was just like, I know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I look back like, whoa, that was something. I don't know if you had that moment before where you look back at like any old stuff from like even
Oh.
before you started like strength and conditioning and stuff like that. But
Oh my gosh,
something.
I have a friend who went to Haverford, right? And this is a D3 school in Philly, and he was a high jumper. And I remember giving him like sets of 5x10 deadlifts, like just crazy volume work. And it was so funny because at the time his strength coach was like, "This is a terrible program. Like, you should not be doing this. Like, please do my program." And he would literally go, "No, I'm going to do Connor's program." Right. And like, what's funny, and it's what also showed me too, and taught me great lessons that everything works, right? Because
Yeah.
he still improved and he still got better. Now, was he unnecessarily sore a lot of the time? And could we probably have avoided some of the volume that we saw 1,000%? But he still got better. And so, yes, I look back at some of my programs and I remember I pulled it up recently and I was like, did I really give him like 4x20 on bicep curls? Like, what?
You're like, is that 30 sets in that one day of workouts? Like, no,
Yes,
that's
exactly.
crazy.
Like, you calculate total tonnage. I'm like, oh my God, he's not dead. But no, certainly I've looked back and I've seen some changes in how I operate on things. Uh, but one of the main things too, and I'm glad we can bring up in the personal training background that you have, but then also the fact that you are a CSCS certified coach. And so, how has lifting kind of influenced your career as a physical therapist?
So it was very beneficial, especially in the first year of PT school, because in the first year you go over essentially like your basic courses, your anatomies, your kinesiologies, your exams and interventions, right? So it's like all that is like your bare bones. It's like what you start with, everyone needs to know these, and you get into like your specialties, stuff like that, like as the years go on. The NSCA, the CSCS, all that has been very useful to me because we spent I think 2 weeks of lectures in my kinesis course in the first or second quarter going over program design, which doesn't get touched on in every program apparently. I was talking to people like friends in other programs, and it was just straight out ripped from like chapters 12 through 15 of the NSCA like textbook,
Mm.
like the CSCS textbook. And I was like, okay, cool, I have a foundation of that already. That's great. And then as we got like in person for stuff, I realized that that's not like a common foundation that people have. Like in terms of how to program for power, how to program for strength or muscular endurance, or noting there's a difference between that. Like, so that was like, I found that super beneficial just because I had that background knowledge already. Um, and then in terms of actually translating that later, I don't feel as lost when I'm going to have someone hop on a squat rack that is, 6, 7 months out of an ACL, and we're loading them up with heavy weights for squats or for deadlifts. And like, I know how to cue for that. I know how to like do those things where it's like, okay, you put me in the pediatric setting and I got to get this kid to learn how to cruise and start walking. I feel lost because I got to turn it into a game. Whereas in the weight room, like, all right, cool, we're going to set up here. This is how you're going to do it. Let's fix what we need to fix and move how your body lets you move. So it's
Mm.
very helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think 1,000%, and I think too the interesting piece in what you mentioned there too is that lifting is not necessarily the most common background for PTs. Now, there's obviously PTs lift and lifters PT, right? But at the end of the day, like I think there was kind of a stigma in strength and conditioning sometimes around, oh, well, PTs hate lifting, right? And they don't want us to get stronger. They just want to focus on playing patty cake or whatever, right? Which is obviously not the scenario. But have you seen a little bit more of a shift towards conventional lifting as well within physical therapy? And have you seen that people are embracing it a little bit more on the physical therapy side?
Yes, I think it's yes, but not in like a traditional sense.
Mm.
Um, I think what's been nice is a lot of PTs now are thinking, cool, we're going to load them up, we want to get them moving with heavier weights. It's just how is that going to translate for their sport or their everyday life? If I got a guy that's in here that like has a leg injury or has a quad strain or like a shoulder injury, whatever it is, like they want to get back into the gym. We're going to work on barbell stuff. That's what they're doing. We're going to work on mechanics. We're going to work on maybe some more stability, isolation stuff, whatever it is they want to get better at. If I have a cross country track runner, like, okay, maybe we're going to load them up, but not a traditional barbell set. That's not what they did before when they go back with the team. Rehab's done. We're finished that. They're going back to work with the team. They didn't do barbell stuff with them before. I'm not going to start that with them now because I don't want to change what they're used to doing or change mechanics on them. But I'm going to introduce or keep them going in using a squat or deadlift pattern. Just maybe it'll be a goblet squat. Maybe it's a little more single leg stuff. Maybe it's going to be whatever's going to translate more for strength and with their sport, but not be something that's going to be totally new to them and like shock their system. And then they go back to their sport and they're just kind of, I don't want to say overloaded, but it's just been a lot
Mm.
of new stimulus they don't necessarily need or that may be detrimental to them down
Mm.
the line.
And so I love that process, right? And it's about getting back to what you were previously doing, right, and doing it at a high level. What is something that you wish more strength coaches understood about physical therapists? Because I think that what you just said gives us a little glimpse into how you approach your work. As a whole, what is something that you feel like CSCSs or strength coaches may be better off understanding about working with PTs?
I'd say honestly, a big one, and I maybe just because of where I work, an open line of communication
Mm.
between like if you're sharing like a patient or like your athlete, that's in like just that like a situation. Just making sure that you're kind of being communicative about what's going on and like how they're doing in a PT session versus how they're doing in like their workouts with the strength team or the coaches with the team. Um, that's like I guess a very specific one just because of where I am. But I'd say in general, it's push like push the athletes within their realm, and it's something that like we try to do, but not every place that someone's doing PT is gonna be equipped to do that. So if you
Mm.
feel like if you have the clearance to do that, start pushing them to where they're comfortable and work with them like where they are, but just don't supersede where the PT is in their protocol. Or if it's like a certain phase of like a rehab, just because you don't want to start overloading them in ways they haven't done yet, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. 1,000%. You would be shocked at how poor the communication can be at even places like Division One strength and conditioning setting versus physical therapy too. Like you mentioned, just your place specifically, but like it was funny when I first came here. Like the fact that I would get with our PT and share my strength and conditioning program, and then she would share what she was doing with our athletes that we were working on was like revolutionary, right? And not to her, she wanted
Yeah.
that, right? And she was asking for that the whole time, but more on the strength and conditioning side of just like, well, you stick to your world and I'll stick to mine. And it's like, it's just not how this is going to work, right? And that's not how this is going to be beneficial to the athlete. We have to be collaborative and we have to work together. And what I've noticed is it allows progress to come so much quicker. Like these athletes are able to feel better, faster, and come back at a higher level of performance. And it just makes the world of difference. And it also is nice to be a part of a team too, right? It's a team success at the end of the day. So when you see a player who was injured go into the game and be successful, it's fun. It's fun to be able to know you did that with the team instead of just trying to take ownership of that athlete, which is a weird concept in itself.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think it's also like I don't want to say a trust factor, but like I think there's a certain mindset that like PTs are like, no, that's my athlete. Like I don't want you working with him because you're gonna break him or something.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, it gets to a point where it's like, the goal in rehab is to not keep you in rehab.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is to get you from point A to point B in the safest, quickest way. It's the most efficient for your well-being and for where you need to be. Especially if you're a college athlete who is on scholarship and like needs to get back to play to like be eligible for all that. I don't know how all that works. I could have just totally BS'd that
No,
one
no,
there.
no, that's correct.
But um, but like that same thing applies to like the guy that hurt himself and needs to get back to work to support his family. It's like, I want to get you to where you have to get to, and that means you go with a strength coach when you're done or a personal trainer when you're done. I want you to go there and be confident and comfortable with that.
Mm.
And like, if there's questions, I want you to like let me know, because I feel like once you're out of my hands, you're with their hands, or you're in another person's hands. That's who I want you to work with. And that's who like I feel comfortable with you being with. But you can always talk to me if you need it.
Yeah. And I love that, right? Because it is about longevity. And it's interesting that as it's so, I don't know, I'm just sitting here realizing, right? As a PT, you're there for kind of one of the lower moments of their career, right? Of them coming back from post injury, whether, like you said, if even if it's just somebody trying to come back to work, that's a very stressful and high emotions time, right? Versus strength and conditioning, I kind of get to do the fun stuff, right? And we get to see all the, okay, oh, you just set a PR, right? Or you did all these fun things within the weight room. Look how much stronger you are. Vertical jump is up, whatever it may be. We get to see kind of the exciting times. And so to me, that's why we need to drive the team aspect even more, because we can say, okay, well, the only reason you're able to get to these exciting times is because of the person you worked with in the more challenging times, which would be your physical therapist.
No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Greg Masturzo, it's amazing to catch up with you. And what I love about Greg too is he said, I do have to treat patients right after the podcast. I'm like, I knew you had something immediately because you're a hardworking man. Not only are you handsome, you're very hardworking and you have a gnarly mustache. I love it.
Some of those things are accurate.
Yeah, I would say 100% are. But thank you so much for coming on, man. I really enjoy it. One, just to catch up with you, but then two, really to hear your perspective. It was really kind of eye-opening for me on certain things, and I just appreciate you greatly. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. It was nice to catch up with you too.
1,000%. And like I said, I'm sure we'll be getting a text from Anthony right after this episode is released. So I'll be able to catch up with you then as well. If anybody wants to follow you on social media or follow up with any of your work or anything, what would be the best way to do that?
Oh God, hold on. You did tell me to have this ready, and I did. I mean, like, okay, like Instagram. I guess you'd follow me.
There you go.
Yeah, at Greg __ Masturzo, Masturzo. I guess the name's in the thing, so it doesn't matter. Not that I post anything there. I'm hoping in the next year or so to start making something a little more PT related in terms of social, but that's just life. I mean, feel free to message me on that note. I'm totally down to talk about whatever.
Awesome.
That's the only real relevant social I have.
Now, I won't give out Greg's Snapchat, okay? But in the summers, you will see him post a story of Rita's Ice, okay? And
no, not Rita's, Pops.
Or Pops. Sorry.
Pops Water Ice.
Sorry, I apologize. I do not want to disrespect the name of Pops. What is the flavor that you prefer?
Oh, the the double chocolate chip.
The double chocolate chip, which,
Yeah.
as water ice, looks like straight poop. I want all our listeners to know it looks like poop. And every time Greg will post a story of it, I'll always message back and say, poop water.
It's always it's Connor and I never interact on Snapchat unless it's a picture of the water ice.
It is
That's
poop.
the only thing. Oh God.
Well, oh, it's fantastic. Well, Greg, seriously, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming on. I have had a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.